And after the game, they're very blasé in the interviews. I'd be looking at players and I'm thinking they're like robots. They're like, oh, well, we're a bit lucky, Bruno. No, find a way.
So opening the episode with Roy Keane, that was something that I always wanted to do. And Roy is opening the episode because, of course, a couple of podcast episodes ago, I spoke about what I term Guerilla, Gaeilge. And up pops Roy with a fantastic example right on Sky Sports. He's literally using the Fictional, albeit in English form or in Hiberno-English form. Let's listen to that again.
And after the game, they're very blasé in the interviews. I'd be looking at players and I'm thinking they're like robots. They're like, oh, well, we're a bit lucky, Bruno. No, find a way.
Gaeilge, you're very welcome to Undercover Irish, Guerilla Gaeilge, Part 2, Port a Do. And let's start with Roy there. So in the previous Guerilla Gaeilge episode, one of the features that I outlined that exist within our own Hiberno-English dialect of English, and an element of Guerilla Gaeilge, what I term to be Guerilla Gaeilge, in other words, the Irish language hidden within the English speech pattern in Ireland, if you like, kind of a hidden in plain sight. One of the aspects I looked at was the I'm sure láithreach, the I do be, something we do repetitively, or there's repetition involved, something we do regularly on a regular basis. The idea behind the I'm sure láithreach is something that we do weekly, monthly, daily, regularly. It's the habitual present tense. And Roy's example of it there comes straight from our own dialect in Caherkirky, my own native city. He says, I'd be looking at these players. This is basically short for I do be. And it comes straight from the pattern of speech, or the sentence structure, the way we would have said it a couple of generations ago, as Gaeilge. There's something amazing about that. So there we have it, right on Sky Sports, live, the I'm sure láithreach. Mahu Roy, fair play. And the Gaeilge got great kind of feedback from that particular episode. I think my idea with it, and I'm certainly not the first person to do this, but the idea with it was to open up people's minds to look at the speech patterns, the dialects, the way that we would speak the English language in Ireland, and to recognise that there's a bridge back, if you like, to our own native teanga there. It's right there, hidden in plain sight, as I said. And if you're a fowler more, if you're learning the Irish language, one of the things that can be very helpful to you is if you start noticing these patterns, these words, these things that we do when we speak English. And to recognise that, as I said, it's like a bridge back, a way of finding a way back to Gaeilge. I mentioned feedback there as well, Gaeilge. In the last episode of Guerilla Gaeilge, I mentioned about the plural, so the ye and the yis, and the way that we would say the plural of you in Irish. And of course, this exists in other places as well. And thanks to Clarity Burke on YouTube, who pointed out, of course, that this is very common in America, but y'all. And she mentions that it tends to pop up in places where you have non-English speaking immigrants, like the Irish and like others who settled in America. So it's possibly an influencer on that. But thanks for that feedback, Cara. And in today's episode of Gaeilge, I want to build a little bit on Guerilla Gaeilge 1. So in Guerilla Gaeilge 2, we're going to look at some other aspects of the Hiberno-English dialect, which are definitely informed by and influenced by Gaeilge, whether it's sentence structure, whether it's grammar, whether it's pronunciations, or whether it's words. So the first one I want to look at in today's episode of Gaeilge goes back to Roy there. So Roy, like any good Cork man, will often use the word like. He uses it in that clip when he's talking about he'd be like. That word like is often used by us. I'm not going like. I'm not doing that like. It's almost like a sentence ender. It can also be used to describe the state that we're in. Now, that's obviously used by other languages as well. But there's a parallel of that, of our use of like at the end of a sentence. As Gaeilge. So we might use aun, there, or marshin. Marshin is a common one, like that. So this is a way of us softening our sentences, aligning our sentences, sometimes showing empathy. It's almost like, I think of it like an extra full stop sometimes. You listen to someone talk in Ireland in various dialects, and often the word like comes up again and again and again through a sentence or through a conversation. And like I said, it almost acts as a sentence ender, like an extra full stop. Another example of it is, so I am. So that term, so I am. I'm raging, so I am. Very similar to, he's late again, so he is. And what we're doing there is we are emphasizing something. We're reaffirming something. We're putting an extra emphasis on what we want to say. The verb comes back to anchor the truth and the stance. I'm going out, so I am. I'm going there, so I am. He's going to the shop, so he is. So you're doubling down on what you want to say. This again comes from our way of speaking as Gaeilge. Now, this particular element of it sometimes, or in history, historically, had been parodied and turned into kind of a stage Irish thing again. In the previous episode, I spoke about how this was done very deliberately as a way of caricaturizing Irish people. Not just, I suppose, previously the attack had been on the Irish language, and then the attack came on the way that Irish people spoke English, to paint Irish people in a certain way, in a certain light, all part of a colonial project. The next example of Gaeilge, have you ever found yourself talking about a person and say himself or herself or yourself, when perhaps if someone was speaking what might be termed proper English, that wouldn't be used in that scenario? So like, will herself be there? And how's himself getting on at the moment? And this comes from Gaeilge, of course. Himself, é féin. Herself, í féin. And how are you yourself? Tú féin. Conas atá tú féin. How are you yourself? So what we're doing there is we're using a reflexive pronoun as a social index. We're talking about status, familiarity, irony even at some point. This is about, it's not really just about grammar, it's about kind of painting or tapping into a familiarity with the person that you're talking about. They intrinsically know who you're talking about. How's himself? How's herself? You know, í féin, é féin. But there's also a social element to it. It's that closeness, that kind of, you know who I'm talking about, I know who I'm talking about. We don't even need to use a name. Similar to that of Gaeilge, your man or your one. Now, depending on your dialect, you might say your man or your one or your one, depending on what part of Ireland you're from. Your man down the road is who I'm talking about. Your man down the road. So what we're talking about there, similar to the last one, is it's not about ownership necessarily, it's about a shared understanding. It's like a relational reference within a shared community knowledge. I'm talking about your man over there. Your man over there. I'm talking about your one down the road. So again, this is something that comes back to Gaeilge and still surfaces within the way that we speak English in Ireland. Now, much of this podcast, I'm presenting knowledge or information, or as much as I possibly can, to you, the listener. But I have a question at this point. One of the things that I'm massively interested in is the Irish abroad. So the influence that particularly Irish speakers have had on other parts of the world, especially at the 20th century, say the 19th century, the late 1800s, when you had a couple of generations where there was massive emigration of people who would have spoken Irish as their first language. And we see that imprint in other parts of the world. But one of the things that I have a question mark around, and maybe someone could help me in this, is that one of the things that we would say in Irish when we're talking about a person in our family, we might say, if we wanted to say Sean in our family, you might say Sean Agwinia, Sean Agwinia, the Sean that we have, the Sean that we have, Sean Agwinia. Now, I don't know, there was massive emigration to places in North England and in Scotland. And one of the things that's common in Manchester is our kid for, our younger brother, our Sean, or this or that, O-U-R, as in ours. And I often wonder, does that come from and Sean Agwinia, the example I gave, or Sean, and Sean Agwinia, the Sean that we have, the Sean that we own, if you like. So that's a question for any listener around Manchester, around that area. Could you help me out with that? Is there a direct link? Next up, Gaeilge, let's talk about sound and rhythm. And even in the way I said rhythm there probably gives a little bit of a marker as to what's coming. This one is probably well known and it's been parodied, left, right and centre. But I think it's time that people take a little bit of pride and ownership on this. In Ireland, of course, the common joke is the 33 and a third, okay? So this is because directly linked to the Gaeilge, to the Irish language. This is because there's no equivalent to the TH sound from the TH sound that exists in English. There's no equivalent as Gaeilge, or the closest equivalent would be a D sound or a T sound. So in that example of 33 and a third, think about the number first of all. So, if you were to speak the English language, again, so-called properly, you'd be softening that, you'd be saying 3. And I probably can't even do it properly, even trying. But of course, in Ireland, we tend to say 3, which sounds very much like the tree that grows outside in the park. And the reason for this is because the Irish language word for the number is actually 3, T-R-I, fada. So what we have there is, you can't make a sound your language never trained you for as such. And this is something that's been passed down to us. So when we see a TH sound, or when we're speaking a word or pronouncing a word that has a TH sound, particularly at the start, we're much more likely to go with a harsher T sound. And I mentioned the kind of D sound that can sometimes accompany this phenomenon, if you like. This is why when we see the THEM for them, and I emphasize the TH often, particularly if we're speaking in a relaxed form, in a colloquial way, we'll be saying them, or this, or that. So whenever the TH sound pops up, that particular TH together, if you have a situation where you're speaking in a relaxed form, you're speaking colloquially, you're speaking in maybe your natural form, it's very likely that you're going to drop that H part of it and end up closer to a D sound. This, them, that. Again, can be traced straight back to Gaeilge and the sounds that exist within the Irish language, or more specifically, the sounds that don't exist within Gaeilge.
This is the part that I find most interesting. You have actually made this film the most successful film ever shown here. Isn't that great? Huh? I mean, people are coming from all over the country to see the film. They're even coming from Gdansk to see the film. Huh?
And for my next point, I've just had a helping hand there from Bishop Brennan in Father Ted, of course. And the reason why I shared that particular clip, not alone is it an iconic clip from an iconic show, but if you listen to that particular extract or that particular audio clip, you'll notice that rather than saying film, I can't even do it in one syllable. I'll try. Film. In Ireland, we'll tend to say the film. Okay, the film. And what we're doing there, we're adding syllables. So the Irish language on Gaeilge is an oral language. You know, Irish is an oral culture. I've mentioned on many previous episodes about how our stories, our history, our culture, our language, our music was passed ó gluain go gluain, from generation to generation, ó bhéal go bhéal, from mouth to mouth. So much of our socialization, so much of our knowledge is literally passed from mouth to mouth. So there's a massive importance on your ability to speak, your ability to articulate yourself. And the Irish language is built in such a way that the flow is more important than the written word, in my opinion. So that's why we have arús, that's why we have sévús. These are things that make the oral sound flow better. So you can go from one word to the next word easier. The second kind of relationship between that word film and Gaeilge is that often we will put in an extra syllable, not just an arú, not just a sévú, but an extra syllable into how we speak. So if you were to describe very good in Irish, the closest thing you'd come up with is an va. An, A-N, va, M-H, making that V sound, A-I-T-H, an va. But the way that I would say it is anava, anava. So there's this extra syllable popping up out of nowhere. And the purpose of that is to allow the speech pattern flow a little bit better, a little bit more naturally, anava. And this is like an intensifier we can use all the time. So if something is very low, it's ana ishil. If something's very high, it's ana ard. This is something that pops up again and again and again as Gaeilge, and it's to be seen clearly in the way that we speak the Hiberno-English dialect here in Ireland. So that word film that was used so gracefully by Bishop Brennan in that clip, this is something we see in a lot of other words where there may be one syllable on paper, but when we say the word, we elongate it, we make it a bit longer, we add a syllable similar to the way we would say Anna. Now, we just focus there on sounds and the way we speak. So reflect for a second, regardless of whether you have a lot of Gaeilge, you're fluent, you're fluorseach, or whether you think that you don't have any Gaeilge at all. If some of this is familiar to you and that's the way you speak, your English, if you like, just think about this for a second. You're not making a mistake and you're not hearing a mistake. What you're hearing is a bilingual mind at work, keeping Gaeilge alive. So if you don't have any Irish or you think you don't have any Gaeilge at all, and some of this, like I said, is what you say and what you do, you already have a bilingual mind. Next up, Gaeilge, let's turn to one of my favourite topics, time. I've mentioned on previous podcasts about how there are different ways of looking at time, experiencing time, understanding time. And it's no different when it comes to language and linguistics around time. One of the things that you might hear when someone is expressing how long they have been doing something, how long they have been at some place, is you might hear someone say, I've been doing it with 5 years. I've been doing it with 5 years. Now, there's two aspects of Gaeilge at play here. The first is the word with. So with, the closest to with in Irish is le. And in as Gaeilge we would say, Tá sé á dhéanamh agam, it's been done by me, le cúig bhliain, with 5 years. Le, with cúig, 5 bhliain years. So I've been working for 5 years, or I've been working with 5 years. Le cúig bhliain. And in Irish, the second aspect of it, which we don't say in English, is le cúig bhliain anús, with 5 years down. So sometimes in English, we might say, I'm putting it down, I'm putting the time down. So cúig bhliain anús, le cuaig bhliain anuas, with 5 years down. It's a way of saying it's gone, it's in the past. Le cuaig bhliain anuas. Staying with time then, a Gaeilge. 2 things that are very powerful and you can use them very regularly as Gaeilge is seo cata and seo chuaing. Seo cata and seo chuaing. So seo is kind of like this. Cata is spent, over, finished, thrown away. Seo cata. So just spent, just gone, just finished. That's for the past. The future then is the seo chuaing part. So seo chuaing. Now, in English we would say the future, right? You know, it's ahead of us. Even me saying ahead of us is a little bit, it's back to linguistic relativism. But seo chuaing is like this that's coming towards us. This that's coming towards us. So last Monday would be an luain, the Monday. An luain, the Monday. Seo cata, the Monday just spent, the Monday just gone. An luain seo chuaing, you can use it for the week. An teachtain seo cata, the week just gone, the week just spent, the week, I suppose in English you'd say in the past, but cata, spent, thrown away. The future then would be an luain seo chuaing, the Monday that comes towards us, the Monday that's coming. Next week would be an teachtain seo chuaing, the week that's out there in front of us, the week that's coming towards us. Now this is something that we always hear in the Hiberno-English dialect. So we would say Monday gone, Monday just gone, Monday coming, instead of next Monday, Monday coming, Monday in front of us, the week ahead of us. So again, that linguistic relativism that we've mentioned way back in the very first episode of this Gaeilge. And if you're new to this podcast, go back and check it out. That linguistic relativism, the idea that the language that you speak informs the philosophy, the way that you think. So Monday just gone, an luain seo cata. Monday coming, an luain seo chuaing, the Monday that's coming towards us. So it places us into this kind of a stance, if you like, where the past is spent, it's thrown away, it's finished, it's gone. The future is coming towards us, almost like a physical being. And like I said, we see it straight, clearly and directly in the way that we would speak in the Hiberno-English dialect, where we say Monday gone, Monday, instead of last Monday, Monday gone, Monday spent, Monday coming, the weekend ahead of us. So that's seo cata and seo chuaing, and they very much influence the way that we speak English here. The next one in the Gaeilge is one I caught myself saying, and it was one of those things that I had a little laugh myself. I said to someone, "You won't be long there. Don't worry, you won't be long there." So I suppose the proper English would be, it won't take long, or it won't take you long. But in Irish, we would say, ní bheidh tú I bhfad ann. So I said, you won't be long there. This is a completely direct translation from the way you would say it as Gaeilge. You won't be long there. Ní bheidh tú, you won't be. I bhfad, for long or long, ann, there. Ní bheidh tú I bhfad ann. And what we see in that is the sentence structure again. I mentioned the importance of the verbs or the action words as Gaeilge in Irish in the first Guerilla Gaeilge podcast. Verbs are what we use 99% of the time as sentence starters. So the verb, subject, object, it's a different structure to English, to Guerilla. And it's something that crops up again and again and again. You might lead with the verb and follow on afterwards with the rest of the sentence. So, you won't be long there, ní bheidh tú I bhfad ann. Good example of that particular one. Sticking kind of with sentence structure. I mentioned the importance of verbs there, and I mentioned the importance of verbs in the previous episode. One of the most important words, both, I suppose, in English and in Irish, is and or agus. But there's a slightly different use of them at times. So, and in English is used, to join things together in a sentence. Agus can be a bit more powerful in the Irish language, though. And it's something that we use in the way we speak English as well, to describe two things happening simultaneously at the same time. So, I was outside and it raining. So what we mean there is I was outside, it was raining at the same time. Bhí mé amua, I was out. Bhí mé amua, agus é curbáistí, and it raining. I left the room and he coming in. So two things happening simultaneously. I left the room, someone else was coming in at the same time. But we can put it together as I left the room and he coming in. I drove down the road and he coming against me. I was driving down the road, somebody else was coming against me. Two separate things happening simultaneously at the same time, and we put them together with and, agus. And like I said, this comes directly from Gaeilge. I was outside and it raining. Bhí mé amua, agus é I cur báistí. So now, Gaeilge, let's take a breath and look at what we've actually uncovered here. We've looked at how we talk about time, or an aspect of how we talk about time. How we say we've been doing something with years. How the past is something that's gone, shokata. How the future is something that's coming towards us, shochuing. That's Gaeilge shaping English. We've looked at sentence structure. How we say, or we might say, you won't be long there. How and, or agus, can mean two things happening simultaneously at the same time. How Irish and Gaeilge builds the sentence first and English words come second. Again, that's Gaeilge shaping English. We listened and we spoke briefly about sound and rhythm, the extra syllables we add to make words flow, the missing TH sounds that our mouths were never trained to make, the music of Irish speech still beating underneath English, or perhaps over English. Again, that's Gaeilge shaping English. And then we moved to quieter stuff, the social meaning, the like at the end of the sentence, the so I am, the himself, the herself, é féin, í féin. All the small ways we soften, emphasise, align and relate to each other in conversation. Again, that's Gaeilge shaping how we think in English. And here's why it all matters. None of these features are accidents. They're not mistakes. They're not laziness. They're not bad English. They're a result of a bilingual population adapting under pressure, finding ways to carry their own language forward inside an imposed one. And that's what I mean by Guerilla Gaeilge. It adapts. It hides in grammar, in rhythm, in sound, and in social meaning. And that matters for learners, for Fowlamiori, because Irish and Gaeilge is not unreachable. It's familiar already. It's right there for you. It matters for teachers, for Moontori, because it means that students, no matter how their attitude towards the language is, they're not starting from zero. Start them from places of recognition. It matters culturally, because it lets us replace kind of imposed shame with understanding. We replace mockery with insight. So when you realise that the English you speak already carries Irish ways of seeing the world and language structure, learning Gaeilge stops becoming daunting. It becomes an act of remembering, an act of recovering. Next time someone says, no one I know speaks Irish, you can say with confidence, everyone you know does, but they just don't know it. And that's Guerilla Gaeilge. Once you hear it, Gaeilge, you never stop hearing it. Gaeilge, I've really enjoyed these episodes. If you've enjoyed them too, Gaeilge, give them a like, give them a share. Send me a bit of feedback. If there's examples you have come across or examples that you've seen, please do share them. Follow on Instagram, Gaeilge. Massive thank you, Gaeilge, to those who are supporting on Patreon. My aim is to change this podcast to a visual podcast as well. I think there's a lot of stories, a lot of scéalta, a lot of history that I want to do that I think would go well with visual elements. So, Gaeilge, hopefully I will have that up and running as soon as possible. And my thanks to patrons who support the podcast. Your support helps cover the cost of hosting the podcast and the cost of apps and things that I use to both research, I suppose, but also to put together the audio aspect of it and hopefully move on to the visual element of it next as well. I couldn't do it without you, simple as that. Remember, this is an ad-free podcast, so my thanks go of míle mahagat to those people who've supported. If you want a Gaeilge to support the podcast outside of that, please do share on your social media, follow on Instagram. Makes a huge difference to getting the podcast out into the algorithm. A Gaeilge go of míle mahagat as always. Asocht fe lum. If this is your first podcast, please do go back and listen to some of the previous episodes. And I'll see you soon. A Gaeilge slán, tamil, fanigi slán, agus berigi bua.